Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks, whatever you're joining us from. Thank you very, very much for being here with us today to talk about breaking the experience paradox, a courtesy of Conexion and Latinx in gaming. So, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to talk to you guys about this topic. I hope you're enjoying Conexion so far. There's a lot of great content, great opportunities coming your way during the month of June, I am sure. But today I am Gilliard Lopes, as you can see there. My pronouns are he and him, and I am a senior game designer on the FIFA series here at Electronic Arts in Vancouver, Canada. So it's just past 5 p.m. here, my local time. I know there's a lot of my folks from Brazil, where I'm from, joining as well, and it's a bit later for them over there, 9 p.m. in the evening. So thank you for making the time. Thank you for being here and interested in talking about the challenges of landing your dream game development job. And I hope that after today, you'll feel that little bit more equipped to 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 get your job and to get through what I consider one of the hardest obstacles into building your career, which is landing that first job. So we're gonna start today. Just I'll talk a little bit about myself and my experience in the games industry. We're gonna build some sort of a character sheet for myself here as we get warmed up to talk about all the good stuff today. So I am from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I started my career very young, 16 to 17 years old was when I started making small games, and I actually built a small independent studio called Parallelo back in Rio with two of my mates. And these screenshots, they might not look that great today, but we were actually one of the pioneering game development studios in Brazil. We were building technology for games, game engines, at a time when there were very few of us in the entire world, let alone in Brazil and Latin America, who were doing that. And really, what we did was we taught ourselves what was needed in order to thrive in game development. And I was very fortunate to have a great partner and my buddy Fabio Policarpo, who is one of the most well-known graphics programmers coming from Brazil, an author of computer graphics books. And we had this great partnership at Parallelo where we worked together, and I learned a lot from him. These screenshots, they're from some of the demos that we wrote with to showcase our engine. So I come from a programming background, but very soon, even during the parallel years, I found out that my real calling was a creative aspect of working with games as a game designer and as a producer. And if you guys had a chance to run your own small studio, be your own boss, you probably know how much you have to do, like outside of of the stuff you really love to do. So that was a great learning experience for me, and I think it gave me the maturity that I needed to then progress in my career. So as I said, from very early days, I was responsible along with my partners in having a business in video games and learning how to make them at the same time. So we had a pretty successful stint at Parallelo, and we licensed our technology, our engine. The main product that we had was called Fly 3D, was a graphics engine, a game engine. Back then, we didn't have the standards in the market, and certainly the best tools in the market that we have today with things like Unreal Engine and Unity 3D. Back then, you could be a small studio in a country like Brazil that didn't have that much uh, of a report as a games industry, and still build tools that would be useful. And we lived off of that work, and I think we did pretty well at Parallelo. But as time went by, we what we really wanted to do was to become a full-fledged game development studio where we could make our own games. And there was no investment in Brazil that that we could find. Like we did our homework, we wrote our business plans, and we went around and looking for venture capital. And back in the country, the back in the day in the country, it was really hard to even find investors that understood what games were, what the potential of the games industry was. And then around 2005, we decided to go our separate ways. We figured out that in order to continue to grow our careers, we would have to find different ways to do that. So my partner Fabio went to San Francisco, worked on a few pretty cool game studios there, worked on Star Trek Online, and worked on Brutal Legend for Double Fine Productions. And I actually took what I call a pit stop in southern Brazil at Hoplon, which was back then the biggest studio in the country. And that's where this MMORPG called Taikodam was made. And it was a very ambitious project, especially considering the Brazilian industry. And again, was a great learning opportunity for me. This at Hoplon was where when I finally, I guess, broke into a more mainstream type of game development arrangement where we had uh, full-fledged teams of designers and programmers and artists and producers. We had a marketing team. The company was really well invested in making this MMORPG idea work out, and I was the producer for the entire game during that time. So I had the opportunity to supervise the whole development team, 70 plus folks who were working on this game at Hoplon, and I was, you know, the one driving that team forward. So again, that experience was critical for me to be where I am today, I am sure. But it was still the Brazilian industry, it was still learn as you go for the most part. And then when I realized in around 2008 that I had tried a little bit of everything in the Brazilian industry, from having my own small studio and trying to grow it, trying to find investment for it, but also working for the biggest studio that we had. I realized that if I wanted to continue to grow my career, I probably needed to look for something abroad, and that's when I started that process. And thankfully, there was a match made in heaven between Electronic Arts and the FIFA team and myself. I interviewed for them. I'm going to tell you a lot about that experience today here and also learnings since then. After all, it's going to be 13 years this year, 2021, that I've been at EA working on FIFA the whole time. So here I have a just a few tidbits from from my career at EA. The very first FIFA game I worked on the left there with Ronaldinho still in action was FIFA '09 Ultimate Team. Um, and then one of the projects here on the right that I'm most proud of, and I have so many good memories from, is the World Cup 2014 in Brazil, where really my work as a designer and a producer in FIFA started to uh, I don't know, started to take more notice because it was the World Cup in my home country. I was put in a position where I could influence the design of the game in a much broader way. And to this day, it's still my favorite project that I've helped build at EA. But then some more recent screenshots here. One that I'm again very proud of, very happy to have been part of, was in FIFA 16 when we were able to bring women's football into FIFA for the first time, and just the whole experience of working with the female athletes, seeing what it meant to them for a game like FIFA to recognize and use its platform to promote and raise awareness about that side of the sport that we all love that gets so little attention and still does to this day if you compare it to their male counterparts. So to be involved in that and to be part of that story was a watershed moment, if I'm honest with you, of working at EA and on FIFA. And then on the right here is our latest game, FIFA 21, on the next gen consoles, and just a glimpse of how good a sports game can look. in the new hardware that we have. And of course, we don't stop there, even though there's nothing we can say about what's coming next at this time, which I would love to, but I can't. But so this is to give you guys just a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from, the experiences getting here where I am, and also during this time, as I mentioned, interviewing for EA, interviewing for a number of companies overseas, and coming from Brazil back then, back in 2008, when I was looking for the next chapter in my career. That taught me a lot about the challenges that I'm sure a lot of my fellow Latinos, and Latinas coming from countries that may not have the most recognized uh, record in the games industry, but still a lot of very very talented people that are just might be looking for the next chapter, and whatever I can do to help in that ride, I'm sure that I'll try to do that. So hopefully that's what you take away from our talk today. But enough about me, and let's get into the nitty gritty of it. So we're here to talk about one of the biggest challenges that I think you'll face when trying to break into any new industry, any new career, but particularly video games. And some of the skill sets within video games are uh, are particularly tricky to navigate through the whole portfolio, resume, interview process. So I'd like to take an analytic approach to why it is so hard, what is this so-called experience paradox, and what we can do to break it. So what is the experience paradox? I'm sure everyone at some point must have encountered this, but the simplest way I can put it in words for you is something like, to get a job I need experience, because that's what the job posting requires. But in order to get any experience, I need a job. And you can see how this is a paradox. It can become a chicken and an egg problem, where if every job posting requires years of experience, and in a lot of ways, especially in creative skill sets, creative fields in video games, you're going to see more and more that being a hard requirement. So if they all require years of experience, how is someone who doesn't have such experience ever going to get it? And um, as I said, this, as simple as it looks, and Zoram just posted there on the chat saying mind blown. As simple as that looks, it is a hard problem. It's a real problem. And to me, one of the hardest that you're going to encounter. So I've been spending a lot of time thinking about that and trying to understand how, at the same time as you have this as a very recognizable problem that people face, I look around, I look in my networks, I look among my friends, the people that I've known and I've made, friends that I've made during my career. So many of them have broken through this. So many of my Brazilian friends and folks that I know from there, talented folks, are making a living out of their dream jobs. And I'm going to share with you the stories of a couple of them today. Um, but yeah, I think there's value in trying to understand, how do you break through? How can we, what can we learn from the successful people that came before us? And hopefully that will help the ones that are coming after us to reach, those same levels or even higher. So that's the whole idea behind taking, as I said, an analytical approach to this problem, right? And as I also mentioned, it does apply a lot more to game design, more creative fields in games. But I think even in careers that have a little bit more of a standardized path, such as software engineering, programmers, uh, this still applies, because video games are still so specialized, and they require sometimes some very specific experience, and just best practices and things you learn as you ship your games, um, that interviewers and recruiters very often try to rely on. So, as I mentioned, this brings us a problem that's a little bit like a chicken and egg situation. And the question that I've always been asking myself when thinking about this very philosophical question is, why though? Why is it so important to ask for experience from your candidates? And I think we start answering the why though question by understanding who is on the other side. Who is the interviewer? Where are they coming from? Why is experience so important? And why is it such a common requirement that it's most often the very first sentence you read in every job posting? So, as a game designer, I'm a big fan of empathy, of putting yourself in someone else's shoes. It's what we have to do as game makers. So why not approach this problem the same way? Let's try to understand a little bit of why experience is such a cherished uh, component of a candidate's makeup when the interviewer is looking into them. So a few things that I think contribute to that being the case. One is that in a lot of careers in games, formal education isn't really a set standard. And that's where I think careers such as software engineering, programming, they do have uh, a little bit of a little bit less of this pressure on you showcasing experience. That's because of formal education being more standardized. So an interviewer, when they're looking at someone's resume and they see that they've gone, they have a degree in computer sciences, they know what to expect, at least at a baseline level, right? They know that, worst case scenario, not even knowing, maybe they don't know what the university or institution this candidate attended, but they do know that in order to get that degree, there's a pretty set baseline standard. uh, that's not so true when you talk about game designers, for example, and I can speak a lot about that side of things because that's my career, that's my role. um, but there's no such thing as a standard formal education program for game designers. Sure, there are many schools, many degrees, but I think we're still a couple of steps behind the curve to having a standardized education system there, and maybe that's something that's never gonna go away, um, given how complex and how many different specializations within designing games there are, from narrative to audio to systems and gameplay and user experience and so many others. So the point here is that one of the things that is running through an interviewer's mind when they're thinking about a candidate is, hey, how I really don't have a baseline here, at least not based on their academic uh, education. And even if you do, I think this still holds true to some extent, even if you're talking about a career where formal education is a bit more standardized, because games are so unique. Because a software engineer coming from a different industry still is expected to have a learning curve before they are contributing in the game environment. So, so even in that case, I think this could be a source of uncertainty on the interviewer that could lead to them relying on experience as a balancing factor. Another reason why experience is relied upon are soft skills. And again, in some careers in gaming more than others, but in every field, soft skills are so important. We build entertainment products and services, and a lot of times decisions are made uh, that rely upon, you know, someone's, you know, how how they can sense or feel what's going on. They rely a lot on empathy and a designer's ability to put themselves in the player's shoes. Um, a lot of communication is a huge challenge when you're making games because um, to, until you get to the point where you can look at the game and look at the results of what's being built, you have to talk about it in a level of abstraction that relies a lot on the communication skills of the people involved. And I could, I could sit here all night just listing different soft skills, interpersonal skills that are so crucial to building games. And therein lies the issue. These skills really, they are hard to evaluate. They are hard to test or to measure when you're interviewing someone. They are very easy to write on a resume, but very hard to really ascertain how much that candidate shows of it because again, it's something that comes from uh, those those relationships and being there doing that and finding out what the qualities that your candidate has are. Um, so as an interviewer, this is another source of uncertainty. Um, you know, has the candidate the soft skills, and how can I be more confident that they'll be the right fit um, for the job, right? Um, I used to say that making games is one of the hardest manifestations of creative collaboration that there is, and creative collaborations so hard to do, so hard to be creative and to develop entertainment products, entertainment experiences, all the while having a team who is contributing to that, collaborating on that with all the different backgrounds and ideas that we have. And I am a huge advocate for diverse teams and diverse diversity being a driver of innovation. Um, but the soft skills that are required to do that work, they're hugely important. And for an interviewer, that is a source of uncertainty, as I said, and as a source of another reason to rely on experience when they can't really evaluate soft skills from the candidate. And here's another one. Again, in making games, a lot of those positions are high impact. And of course, this is going to vary depending on team size. But very often, you were in a development environment where everyone counts and counts for a lot. So building a game does, require adaptability, so many other skills that, you know, i- there's high risk in hiring someone that then isn't fit for the role. I mean, and again, what we're doing here is an exercise of putting ourselves in the interviewer's shoes. So to them, okay, I need to find a game designer who is going to, be the vision holder, the driver, the creative force behind probably one of, one of the most important projects in my company. Like I'm putting a lot of eggs in that basket a lot of times. Or maybe it's an art director who, I know my games will be, you know, a success or a failure a lot due to my ability to convey uniqueness through my art. So that's a very high impact position. A software engineer who will be, bringing some expertise into my team that the current team makeup doesn't have. That that individual needs to fulfill a gap that is important that I get this right. So I found that in the games industry more than a lot of others, in that This is a source of uncertainty for the interviewer and the recruiter. Is the risk of not hiring someone who's not quite what's needed is high. And a lot of times in gaming and game development, there's very little room to maneuver. There's very little room to go back on the market and find the next person. So if you add up just three of the probably many aspects of hiring for video games that go through an interviewer's mind and that are hard problems to get wrap your head around, hard problems to solve. The lack of a baseline in the sense of a formal education, the fact that soft skills are one so important and two so hard to evaluate, and also that every decision counts. Every decision in hiring for a game project is high risk. If you add all that up, it becomes a very enticing proposition to simply rely on asking for experience. Experience becomes the safety net, the catch all that will improve the odds of getting a good candidate when all of those other unknowns are in the mix. And I'm talking from a position of having been the interviewer many times, having been in the shoes of someone who needs to hire, who needs to grow their team, who needs to bring new talents in, and how more often than not, considering that someone has done it before becomes such a, as I said, safety net, such a, you know, more of a comfort zone for the interviewer, that's why we ask for experience so often. That is why the why though, to me, in the goes along. This goes a long way to answering the why though for the experience paradox. Experience becomes such an easy place to be or place to go when you're looking, for a bit more confidence in hiring. So as I said, it becomes the interviewer's comfort zone. And chances are they are going to find someone in the market with the experience they are asking for. But what happens when they don't? And what happens when, by having experience as such a highly regarded requirement, they are missing out on amazing talent that just happens to not tick that box? What if it's you on that side of the table? You are the talent and you're looking for tools to break through this. Understanding the interviewer, in my opinion, is the beginning, is the first step into finding, okay, so how can I now, through my portfolio, through my resume, through my argumentation and interviews, how can I put the interviewer's mind at ease and show that I have the answers to those questions, that I have the fit for the role at hand. That's how we break the paradox. So that's what we're going to look at now. What tools, what tips, what good practices, what successful and sometimes not so successful stories can we share in order to break the paradox and land that job? So, in a way, what we're looking to do is, okay, the the posting asks for experience. I don't have that experience, but I am confident that I can offer them the next best alternative, which is to prove that I can answer those questions in the interviewer's mind. So, what are the tools I can use to build confidence on the other side of that table that I am the perfect fit for the job, despite the lack of experience? So, one of the things that I've learned during this time, it's really not that secret, but an untold secret of job postings, they always aim higher. it is a very common practice. And you could, if you think a little bit about it, you see how much it makes sense for job postings to try to aim a bit higher than where they think they're going to land. Just because if there is this amazing candidate who's just out there and they do, fill in every single requirement, of course we want them. Of course we want them in. But if it gives you some peace of mind, interviewers and who's writing the job descriptions, typically they always aim a little bit higher than just to see if getting those applications, they'll be able to separate the cream from the crop. So with that said, there's no reason, absolutely no reason in my mind, that you shouldn't apply. Or I won't say it myself. I'll let these two uh, these two people say it for me. Like Michael Scott said, Wayne Gretzky said, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." So no reason not to apply. No reason not to try out your, not even your luck. And you're gonna see in the next few slides that this there's a very good reason why you should be practicing the whole process of having your resume and your EV looked at and then going through interviews. But I think, simply speaking, go for it. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it happened to me. Um, First, a caveat: the only situation where maybe you shouldn't just apply to every job posting you find that fits what you want to do with your career is, if you're like shotgun approach applying for 10 or 15 job openings at the same company. And I made that mistake when I was looking for a job overseas, as I mentioned to you guys in 2008. Um, and the feedback I got back was a recruiter from that studio asking me, "Hey, I see you applied for this role and that role and that role. What what really is your expertise? If you applied, it means you think you can do all of these jobs. So what is it, right? Either you're this amazing generalist, someone who can do everything, or you're just, you know, shotgunning it. And that was a learning experience for me. So maybe that's the caveat, is just to manage how it's going to be received on the other end, because, at the same company, recruiters most often talk to each other. But other than that, I think uh, there's no reason why you shouldn't be applying. And let me just share a little bit of how it worked out for me. So as I mentioned in the beginning, it's 2008, 13 years ago. I already have 10 years of game development experience in Brazil, even though I started really young. So I've a, you know, pretty, I don't know, shouldn't say seasoned, but in terms of Brazil, yeah, pretty seasoned game developer already, but never had an opportunity outside of the country, and realized that that's what I needed to do next. Yeah, I started searching, uh, you know, dusted up my resume, learned a lot along the way in how to better format that resume, if I'm honest. And in the end, I still have this. I have a spreadsheet with 100, more than 100 rows, where every row is a job I applied for. So more than 100 applications, all the way back from Brazil with no international experience. And out of those more than 100, I probably talked to maybe 10. So 10 of them ever came back to me and wanted to learn more about me. So that gives you an idea of how, sometimes you have to cast your net pretty wide. Um, but I was fortunate that out of those 10, I had 3 that got all the way to the offer stage. I uh, I talked to Splash Damage in the UK, talked to Ubisoft Montreal, and I talked to EA in Vancouver, a FIFA team. And then, yeah, immediately when I learned it was EA and FIFA, it just made perfect sense. It was a perfect marriage of my 2 biggest passions, video games and football, or soccer, as some people like to call it. So I wasn't afraid of applying, and I wasn't afraid that the first 10 or 20, you know, I never really even got a response. The other thing that this process did to me was I was fine tuning along the way. By the time I got to the interviews that really mattered to me, you could call it my dream job with EA and FIFA. I had plenty of experience with interviews as elsewhere. So that to me was really key. Having just having the resilience to go through all that, I think, made it possible that I landed the job in the end and the job I wanted. So that's a message that I took for myself, a learning that I took from that time was there's no reason not to apply. And now, if we're applying, we need to be ready. We need to ready our material, aid our portfolio, our resumes. And there's a saying that I like to use a lot when talking about this, because we hear about portfolio a lot and how you have to you know take every opportunity to make a game out of thin air, uh, go to game jams, do mods, do this, do that, have an art reel, and those are all, of course, very important things. But to me, your portfolio is only your ammo, but your argument is the gun. In what sense? Your portfolio are the things you can talk about, but how you talk about them, how you format your resume to highlight the things that are actually important in your portfolio, that's how you launch it. That's how you project it. So first thing is, you have these projects, you have this portfolio. Chances are whoever's on the other side will not have heard of the games you worked on, or this amazing mod that you made, or this prize winning game jam project that you were involved in. And that's just natural. It's not anyone's fault. So many games and projects and things are made. And maybe the interviewer has clicked through a link when they saw your resume and they were like, "Oh, that's an interesting name for a game. Like, what has this person done?" And then they click there. They won't spend more than 5 minutes. And that's just reality. So the being able to show why each entry in your portfolio matters and why it matters to your skill and experience and the things you're going to bring to the table once you're hired is the most important thing. And at that point, what you want to do is make every interview about the things you've done, about the examples you have to show. So be ready to talk about it. Don't add something to your portfolio, to your resume, as as a talking point if it really isn't a talking point, if it doesn't have interesting learnings that you can articulate. So again, portfolio is your ammo, but your argument is the gun. Anticipate questions about your portfolio. It's very typical to ask, what was the biggest challenge? What went wrong? What have you learned? You know what? Write that stuff on your resume. When you're mentioning that you worked on something, oh, I was the, staff 3D modeler on this project. What were the challenges? What did you learn? Oh, and I had to also learn about unwrapping because, you don't have to say the because, you don't want to make your resume like a, you know, a manifesto, um, but be sure to mention that. Be sure to mention, hey, you know, give the interviewer a sense of your progression, and do that through examples from your portfolio. So this is what I did when I knew nothing, and then this is the next thing I did, having learned from what I did before, and this is how I progressed and grew. And during an interview, and I can tell you this from personal experience, it's very easy to tell when someone has actually worked on every single bit that they've said they worked on. It's very apparent when you ask these questions and watch their answers. So you want to be the person on the other side who has plenty to say, has taken a lot from the experience you have. Again, we're talking about experience here, and even if it isn't experience in years at a well-known studio, games that everyone has played and they've been published, even if it's experience in terms of your self teaching of getting ready for this role, that's if that's what you have, make sure your portfolio and your argumentation are highlighting that, making the most out of it. And again, building on the other side of the table that confidence that, hey, there's someone that even though hasn't, worked on GTA 6, uh, they show, that they've learned those lessons that we surely are going to learn when we go through the process of making a game from start to finish. And again, doesn't have to be a game that you made from start to finish, but it has to be, every entry in your portfolio has to be something you can argue about, talk about. And again, make sure you're answering the burning questions in the interviewer's mind on the other side. Right? Uh, Even like, this is a line that I have in my notes here. Even a Mario clone has interesting findings. Even if you haven't developed it to the point where it is anything like Mario or isn't any good like Mario, talking about the findings and how by trying to clone Mario, you realize what makes Mario great. So your learnings don't have to necessarily be um, visible in the final product. But as long as you're able to argue, you're able to defend it, you're able to talk about what you learned, that's a worthy entry in your portfolio. But again, portfolio, it's just the ammo. It's how you talk about it that is the key. So as I mentioned, small games, mods, game jams are a great opportunity to not just to add a line to the portfolio. Again, that's not what it's about. It's about the journey. It's about the learning process, and it's about once you have that new line on your portfolio, being able to take something away from it. And the more you can write on your resume about those experiences, again, without making it into a 5 pager, the better. And again, if you can go that one step further and find within your portfolio very, very real examples of things you're expected to do in the role you're applying for. If I'm applying for, again, a 3D modeling role, and in my portfolio, I've worked on many games, but this one is the one where I was in charge of modeling characters from scratch, or environments, or however, whatever you can find there that matches what the role is looking for. Just laser focus on those. Make sure your interview is about those, because that's again what's going to build that confidence on the other side of the table that this person is the right fit for the role. So your portfolio is your ammo, but your argument is the gun. Basically, you want to be this girl when you're talking about your skill sets and interviewing for a job. Did you guys see the latest Battlefield trailer? Uh, I think she's ready. But then there's also the art of interviewing for jobs. And again, that whole process of going through so many job listings and talking to quite a few of them, interviews became to me a very valuable source of feedback. Like, all the ones that I failed to get through still taught me so much, because there's a question I wasn't ready for. Okay, next time I'll be ready for it. Right? Oh, so for this role, they actually expected me to know these other things that I didn't think were required. So every interview is a valuable source of feedback for you. And there's no shame in practicing your interview skills. You can practice by playing the game, i.e., doing interviews. That's always so important. And I don't think there's any shame in doing that to get used to it. And maybe even if you're approved and you don't think that's the right job for you at that time, to say no to it. I think uh, it's a two-way street. You have to be happy with the job. They have to be happy with the candidate. And if it on your side, you know, there's no shame in going through the interview process to just then tell them it's not for you. Uh, but as long as you're taking um, experience from it and using it as a source of feedback, and again, exercising, you can practice with your friends. You can, if you have someone you really trust and you think they could help you, you know, uh, put your arguments into words, like little things. Maybe you're interviewing for a job in an English speaking country, but English isn't your first language. You will want to practice that. And again, there's no shame in that. In fact, I always say, make sure your interview for your dream job isn't your first interview for a job, because that's the worst case scenario you want to avoid. And that's how it happened to me, as I mentioned. By the time I got to talking to the Ubisofts and EAs, I'd been through that process many times. And again, used every step along the way as a source of feedback. Interviews can help you identify those gaps and plug them in. Maybe it's in your resume, maybe it's in your ability to talk about your resume. Um, Another kind of funny anecdote about this whole process of practicing. It's for a different type of interview, but it's something that happened to me that was very intense. Many, many years ago, I started doing press tours and press events for FIFA in Latin America. So I went to Brazil game show events in Argentina and Chile, Peru and Mexico. And before I could do any of that, before I could be someone who's speaking on behalf of EA and FIFA, I had to go through media training, which is essentially that is training how to answer questions from the press, but also training being in that situation, practicing, you know, what it means to be in front of a camera, in front of a microphone, and talking about the work you do in a way that, you know, uh, highlights what EA and FIFA want to highlight, right? So that training was a great experience. And the funny part of it was that the gentleman who was doing the training with me, the communications manager for FIFA at the time, he was like the nicest person ever. Like, just a cool dude, to laid back, and he's like, "Oh, you're gonna do great. This is gonna be cool." Like, blah blah blah. But then there was one final step in the process, in the training process, which was a mock interview. So he would play the role of a reporter and ask me all sorts of questions. actually the worst sort, because that's what he was trying to do, was make me uncomfortable, ask me things I couldn't or shouldn't be talking about, trying to turn the things that I said back at me in a different way as to, you know, make me uncomfortable. And I told him at the time, and I would still tell him if he was still around at EA, that was my hardest ever interview for FIFA and EA, was the mock interview we did in training. After that, the real thing became easy. Uh, and I think that illustrates the reason why you should be putting yourself in the situation where you have to articulate, you have to talk about yourself. Talking about ourselves, not an easy thing, especially talking about ourselves when we're always conscious of, am I sounding too arrogant? Am I, you know, overestimating the value of my experience? Like, with practice, you learn to be serene when you're talking about yourself while still confident. And again, it's all about building the confidence on the other side that you are the perfect fit for the role. Not that you are the biggest superstar they ever interviewed, but also, not leaving any doubts in their minds that you're ready for the job. And finding, just the right tone and the articulation to get that message across is something you should be practicing. And if you have someone you trust, who you think could help answer that question for you, could sit in and help you practice, that would be great. If not, don't miss any opportunity you have to go through this process for real. And make sure, again, as I said, make sure your interview for your dream job isn't your first interview, that you're ready and that you've practiced it until you got there. I think that's another valuable tip that I can share. Last thing about this, and I've done this during that process, as I mentioned, of many interviews. Put it in your head that in every interview you should take one of two things out of it: either the job or an action plan to get the job. And it doesn't have to be that you're going to get this job, but build that within yourself to say, hey, I'm either getting hired today, or I am coming out with a very specific, very self-conscious list of things that didn't go well for me to not get the job, so the next time I'll be ready. And I know this is a hard process, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and trying to guess what made them not approve you is hard. One of the things you can do, and you should be doing at every opportunity, is ask for that feedback. Don't be shy of going back to an interviewer and ask exactly why. And don't expect them to be, completely honest. Sometimes that's just not possible, right? Sometimes the reasons why you weren't approved are out of your control, out of your influence, and maybe they can't share that with you. Oh, someone else already took the job. Oh, uh, you know, we felt it would be, and this is real. This happens. We felt it would be cheaper to hire this other person than you because there's we have to relocate you. Like, sometimes they won't be able to share that with you, but for every time that they are, and for every time that the reason why you weren't quite there is under your control, you need to know this. You need to build up uh, that backlog of things you could be improving, gaps you could be plugging. So write that down and really live that through when you're interviewing. I'll either get the job or I'll get a backlog entry as to what I need to do to get the job. This is an exercise, as I said, that I have uh, done in also in my experience. So if interviews take practice, they also take prep. And again, this was so crucial for me, especially when interviewing for your dream job. I'll share with you a very specific example from my interviews with EA. So back in Brazil, working in the industry down there until 2008, it was very rare that you'd get access to consoles and dev kits. Um, the There wasn't such a thing as the indie games industry, independent developers that had easy access. So first party, Sony, Microsoft, etc. Now they go out of their way to make it as easy as possible for independent developers to publish their games and to to have access to their resources. But it wasn't like this not too long ago. 15 years ago it wasn't like this, and definitely wasn't like this in Brazil or small independent studios in the country. And what that made for me was that I, even though I had been making games for 10 years, they had always been for PC platforms. I didn't have the hands-on experience of developing on console. And okay, I'm interviewing for Ubisoft Montreal, I'm interviewing for EA Vancouver, who primarily make games on consoles. So I knew that question was going to come up. And I had to know, right? Like that's what they do. And they look at my resume and everything that I mentioned is on PC. So it's like I had to anticipate. Did I really? Did I really know? Did I have to know? No. What happened? I had previous interviews where that was asked, and they became a backlog item. I have to be ready next time they ask me about consoles. I have to have a good answer as to, okay, I don't have this experience, but there's nothing preventing me from getting there. And that's how I framed my answer to EA and to Ubisoft. I went back to my portfolio and I had examples of, hey, I may have never made a PlayStation 2 game, but I've made games for all of these generations of PCs with all of these different requirements, and having to, having worked on a, a company that makes small game engines, I had to know about this tech and I had to be able to adapt. And I did. And we were successful. So, what is preventing me from taking this other step? The only reason I don't have console experience is because the opportunities weren't there to develop for those consoles. And if I join your company, I'll have that opportunity. So what's to say I can't, I can't plug that gap? What's to say I can't go after, that, you know, a little blank in my portfolio? And I was so lucky that months later, one of the people interviewing me, who became a friend and someone that I still talk to very often at EA, they told me, "Hey, you know, we weren't quite so sure, but when you answered that question that way, it kind of turned the room. It made everyone's mind that that this person, that this candidate is self conscious, of what he knows, doesn't know. He didn't try to bullshit us into, oh, I've made plenty of console games. Like, he didn't give us any of that. He just said, plain and simple, I didn't have the opportunity, but here's why there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to do it. And that is golden feedback. Someone to tell you that. And again, that's why uh, I really want to share all those tidbits with everyone, because I think that's how basically you turn it around. And again, what does it take to do that? It takes preparation. It takes practice, but also prep. Anticipating questions, thinking about, if again, putting yourselves in their shoes. If they look at my resume and they think about the games their company makes, where are the gaps? Where are the things that they will definitely want to know more about if I'm able to do or not? The other way to look at this is, remember, we're trying to break the experience paradox. We are coming from a position where we don't fill all the requirements for the role to begin with, but we apply it anyway. And again, I've given you many reasons why you should apply. But reality is, if they had a candidate with the experience they're asking for, that candidate would probably be ahead of us. So you could look at it as if you are in a position of debt and you have to show and argue for yourself in order to slowly pay off that debt to the point where you're in the blue. So another thing that you can do that is golden in to achieving that is studying the company's games that you're applying for. Be prepared to answer what you like, don't like about their games, and how you would improve it. There's nothing an interviewer would love more, and you don't have to be right. You don't have to point to the exact things that they agree on the other side that are the strong and the weak points. As long as you've done that work, as long as you've shown that dedication to studying and understanding what they do and how you could bring value, how you could contribute, right? And so be prepared to answer questions about the games that that company makes and have answers ready. As I was saying, there's nothing an interviewer would love more than to see someone on the other side who's done that homework, who cares so much about this job that they've put some hours into what would I do to improve these games if I had the opportunity to. And I guess after all this, we still needs to have a plan. What is it now? DEF? I don't know. If all else fails, if we've done that homework, if we've practiced and we've prepped, and if we've made our portfolio into this amazing arsenal, and we've prepared our arguments to fire that arsenal, and it still doesn't work, there's no shame in finding alternate routes. There's no problem in taking that little bit longer to get to your dream job and taking a tangential way there. Maybe it's a slightly different role, and I'll tell you guys. As I mentioned in the beginning, started as a programmer, software engineer, became a designer and a producer. It was time to leave Brazil and look for something abroad. I applied to a few producer or designer roles, and I wasn't getting anything back. So I decided, hey, why not try out as a programmer? Use my background in computer sciences and having programmed games before as my my door, almost like my stepping stone into the job that I really want. And you know what? That's what EA hired me for, as a software engineer. But 2 years into it, I was already doing design work because that was my goal. And that's what, once I was in, that's how, I convinced, that's what I told everyone that I could, and how slowly but surely I convinced the company that that's where I brought the most value. So in a way, I took, a pretty alternate route into the job that I have today and the job that I love to do. So there's no shame in doing that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So maybe it's a different role you're going to apply for and you're going to navigate within. Maybe it's a different country than you thought. Maybe it's a different market. You want to make console games, but you're going to start a mobile. Maybe it's a different genre of games. I really love to make, you know, story-driven RPGs, but the the jobs that I found are either battle royale or match three clones. I'm I'm gonna do that, build up my portfolio, build up my experience, and then try to find my way into the genre that I love. You know, Size of company. Maybe I do want to work for a big one, or maybe I do want to work for an indie one. But the opportunities are elsewhere, and they're still valuable to get me closer to where I want to go. So to illustrate this a little bit more, I have a couple of examples of people I know, fellow Brazilian developers who uh, have made it to their dream jobs through completely alternate routes. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about their story as an inspiration for everyone, and certainly as an inspiration for me. So, first one is Paula. Paula Silva is currently a technical artist on the FIFA team at EA. Paula's from Brazil. She is the one in the checkered coat here. Back in Brazil, Paula was a software engineer. That's what she went to school for. But seeing that what she really loved to do was games, Paula decided, hey, I'm gonna drop everything and go to study game design in Vancouver. That's where she was headed next. She went from being a software engineer, making her own games in Brazil, to studying game design, and then looking for a job in game design. And she couldn't find any. What does Paula do? She joins EA as a tester. Quality assurance is one of the, I wouldn't say easiest, but readily available ways to get into a game job. But Paula wasn't just any tester. While she was finding bugs and doing the work that a tester does, that's so important, so crucial to shipping a quality game, she was always curious about, okay, so how was that bug fixed again? She made a habit out of talking to the developers from different areas about what they did. Let's go. Hey, can I borrow you for a coffee, 5 minutes? And can you tell me how you fixed that bug that I entered the other day? Maybe next time when Paula is entering a similar bug, she knows that little bit more about the solution to the point where she can actually help the developer. You can find a shortcut. And that's how she built a reputation as, a tester that went above and beyond. And then talking to a technical artist on the team, she found that, hey, you technical artists, you solve some pretty cool problems. I'd love to get a chance to solve those problems with you, to learn from you. She was very self-conscious and very honest about the whole process. And next thing you know, Paula, there's a job opening. People know who Paula is, know what she wants to do. There she is, technical artist on FIFA at EA, and living her dream of being a game developer through a very much an alternate route there. And there she is having fun at the Star Wars booth in one of our events at the studio. Rest assured, it's not always like this. It's not like that every day at EA, but that was a pretty special day. I'm so inspired by Paula, and whenever I have a chance to tell her story or bring her in to tell her story uh, for herself, it's always so inspiring. And I think Carol Dot on the chat there has heard the story before because she's a listener to our podcast, which I'll get into in a second. And Paula has been a guest a couple times in my podcast, so very, very, very inspiring story there. And another one that I'd like to tell you about is Rafael Cunanan, one of my dearest friends that I made in the industry, and a, a former co-host of my podcast with me. Rafael doesn't have a degree and isn't shy about talking about that. Isn't shy about having made it into the industry without necessarily the academic background. And Raph, he started back in Brazil, where I tell you it's pretty it's pretty hot, and ended up in Helsinki, Finland, which is this picture I'm showing you, where it it's damn cold. And not only the climate, but Raph started as a tester in Brazil, started learning game design on his own, reading every book you could find on the subject, asking everyone around him, what is game design? How do I get good at it? Oh, that's the person who, comes up with all the cool stuff in the game, but, also works so hard to make them happen and to document them and to communicate them and to is a guardian of the vision of the project and is an advocate for the player. Oh, that sounds like me. I want to be a game designer. His opportunity as a game designer came all the way up there in Helsinki, Finland, and he went for it. But his dream really was to become the game designer of full-fledged AAA games on console. And in Finland, he was working in mobile. So mobile was his way into the industry. And he built, an amazing experience. That experience took him so many odd places. He was, for a little while, a game designer in India. This is a picture of him in Singapore. Here's the one with his tongue out there, if you couldn't tell. Raph's such a cool dude, such a funny guy, and a dear friend, as I said. And so this journey has taken him all over the world. And then at one point, so he's been in Finland, India, the USA, Canada, both coasts of Canada. Um, and then an opportunity showed up at Electronic Arts, first on the mobile team. And Raph didn't think twice. He was like, if that's what I need to do, if that's gonna be my path in, I'll take it. So he came over. We reunited, which was of course a lot of fun to have him around again and work together again. But in the beginning, we didn't really work together because he was on mobile and I was on console. And yeah, surely enough, after a few years and after, knocking at everyone's door, letting everyone know what I want to do, what I really have a passion for is AAA games on console. I'm a huge FIFA fan. I am an experienced designer. So Raph at this point was a very experienced designer. He had broken the experience paradox, and he just took that little bit longer or maybe a different path to get there. But when the opportunity came to then move on to the console team for FIFA at EA, there he was. Everyone knew what he was capable of. He took it. Now he is again uh, living his dream and working at on the team and on the project that he always wanted to. So these stories to me are very very inspiring, and I hope it is the same to you guys. And I hope that overall everything we went over gives you the those arguments and gives you that confidence and gives you some tips and tools that you can use to break the experience paradox, land that dream game dev job that you have. And if you want to get in touch, if you want more of everything that we talked about here, and if you speak Portuguese, you can find me at PodQuest. It's my podcast where every week I share a lot of these stories, a lot of this insight, a lot of these experiences with everyone. And it's, primarily geared towards helping the Brazilian industry and all of my Brazilian folks that are trying to get into the industry from over there. That's why it's made in Portuguese. Um, but yeah, if you do understand the language, I'd love for you to check it out. It's always a pleasure to talk about these topics with everyone. And yeah, I hope I hope you know by taking an analytical approach to the experience paradox and what the interviewer is thinking on the other side of the table and how you can use your portfolio as your ammo and your argument is your gun. I hope that you feel that a little bit more empowered to face what I think is one of the hardest and most challenging phases of breaking into a new career in a new industry. So thank you for being with me here today. We do have some questions to answer. I'll just take a little sip of my water here. I have a few questions that have been prepared ahead of time, and I'm sure if you want to ask yours on the chat, uh, our our folks in the backstage will be happy to ask them. So yeah, thank you. So we have a few questions that were sent in by members of our community, by people that signed up for uh, this Conexion event. First one is from Ruth. And what they said here is that, you know, they've been told the university title is a requirement for landing a job, and they're worried that, you know, you get to a certain age, studios might no longer be interested in you, and they ask what can they do to avoid ending up without a paycheck? What can they do to grow as a gameplay programmer? So I think questions like Ruth's are the core of what we talked about today, and hopefully I've mostly answered it already with the stuff we discussed. But a degree, if you don't have one, what it really does is it's another element of uncertainty on the part of the interviewer, right? Especially if you're from a programming, software engineering background, it is more often than not expected that you have a degree. And what the degree does, and this is the critical piece, I think, is understanding what the degree does in the mind of the interviewer. And what it does is provide that baseline, provide that, reference point to what this individual has learned and would have to know in order to get a degree. So not having the degree just means that you have to fill that gap with something else. And that's something else. As they mentioned here, they are already a gameplay programmer and a generalist game developer. So I'm sure, Ruth, you'll be able to find within your portfolio plenty of ammo to use as an argument to make the interviewer's mind at ease and fill that gap. I know maybe if they're being very strict, some job openings, they'll immediately see you don't have a degree and they'll turn it away. Maybe, but really, experience and the drive that I'm sure you show, one, because you're asking the questions, so you're really invested in answering the question. Uh, I do hope and I do believe that you'll be able to bridge that gap between yourself and the interviewer with regards to not having a degree by showing plenty of other evidence that you are the right person for the job. But I think your case, your question is a prime example of why we talk about what we talked about today. Then thank you for the reminder, Zoram and folks in the chat. Ruth also asks about age, and that after you hit a certain age, studios stop being interested in you. I have to say, I have never encountered this. Age, or being 30 something or whatever, what that can impact, not the interviewer but yourself, is that depending on your life situation, accepting a job, an entry level job, might be hard for you. Maybe you have too many expenses, and that's not really because of your age. It's more, like I said, because of your life situation. It can be harder to break into a new industry, to change careers the older you are, but only because of the expectations or the life situation, as I said, and not necessarily because the industry itself doesn't accept or doesn't value people beyond a certain age. In games, I am yet to see this happen, if I'm completely honest. Maybe very specific cases. Maybe there's this studio who are working on very, I don't know, something that requires designers that are very much in tune with social media. And they'll look at someone who's a little bit older and they will just, you know, they'll just have this stereotype that, hey, maybe they're not the best person for this job because of that reason. But really, I'm stretching here to trying to find examples of where, and I think that might be the case. Certainly in my experience, certainly at EA, which for the last 13 years I've been involved in many uh, interview processes, hiring processes. I have never encountered anything like what you're asking about here. So I don't think, like, I wouldn't expect age to be any factor, long as, again, we're doing everything we talked about today. We're doing our homework, and we're projecting our our best attributes into something that we can argue about in our interview. Hopefully that answers your question. So next one is Saul Martinez Soleil. Lovely name, and a lovely question too. uh and I'm sure this is something that must have happened to a lot of us. So their question is that even though they have a good resume, portfolio, work experience, it's been hard for them to get to the interview stage. And I think we spent a good amount of time today talking about that, formatting your portfolio, your resume, and highlighting the things that will answer the interviewer's most critical questions. And I hope you can grasp at least part of your answer from that. But I'd also like to remind everyone that there are many outside factors involved sometimes in the hiring process. I can tell you from my personal experience, a lot of those jobs that I applied for, I mentioned more than 100, and I kept track of them. A lot of them did reply, but the only thing they were interested in was if, back then as a Brazilian, if I had the means to get a work visa, or if I was already legally allowed to work in whatever country they were from. A lot of times it was the United States. So that's an external factor. That is something outside of my control mostly, where they might have liked my resume, my portfolio, but there was this other requirement. So I'm just using that as one example of many things that could be involved in this process that might be might not be helping you. Um, but I think if you're not afraid to ask why, oh, if they haven't even replied, chances are if you ask a follow-up question, they won't reply, and sometimes that's just the nature of the beast. But I think in general, every opportunity you have to try to get a sense of what feedback can you take out of any attempt at a job, even if it's a failed attempt. I think it's a valuable uh, goal to have. And again, consider that there are outside factors. Consider the stuff we talked about today about highlighting the key aspects of your portfolio resume that you think are gonna answer the most burning questions in the interviewer's mind, and hopefully that gives you at least some tools to work with that might help you in your search. Thanks for the question. And sorry, I don't have a much better answer than that. Um, uh, but I do strongly believe that doing the homework and following some of the steps that we talked about today, that you're gonna increase your chances, increase your odds. And then the third and final question that we had pre uh, arranged is from Carlos. Carlos Cruz said that they're interested in mentoring and advocating for young people working towards getting a job in game development. And they're asking, what kind of support systems, mentoring tactics uh, that I've seen work best in that regard. And it is a great question. I am involved in an employee resource group at EA called Somos EA, which is a group of volunteer employees that work towards improving the careers and also the representation of Latinos and Latinas in at EA and by extension in the games industry as a whole. So we do a lot of work towards what Carlos's question is, and I'll give you a few examples from those from that process. Um, for example, we participate in events with grad students from institutions in the United States where we know there's a high uh, concentration of the Latin American demographic. And one very common theme that we find, and this was very eye opening to me, is that a lot of times we need to educate the parents. Um, a lot of times there's this notion, and I faced this in my family, so I'm guessing a lot of us must have had this happen in our families, where there's this notion that a proper job is being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, and that education about tech and in particular video games, entertainment as a fruitful career, a fulfilling career, a successful career. A lot of those parents don't believe in it. And a lot of times it's hard getting through to the young, talented individual because there's that net cast from the parents where they're like, oh, this is a waste of time. You know, you shouldn't be interested in this. You should be, you know, working towards a real profession. So I am, when I say I, Somos EA, our group, our ERG, is very much interested and engaged in how can we educate the parents. And because you asked about, best practices, this is one that we haven't gone that far implementing yet, but it's something that we believe very strongly in, and we think could make a difference. So educating not only the talent, but the supporting system around them, that games are a fruitful career, and you know something that they could be proud of if their children are pursuing. Hotcake Le Gourmet asks how we can educate them. Yeah, we're coming up with a few ideas ourselves. So one thing we know we're going to do is in these events where we uh, different industries go and talk to grad students. They you know they're serve as summits where prospective students can go and really just do vocational testing and things like that. um yeah, we need to have material targeted towards the parents. We need to speak directly to them, telling our stories, so inspiring stories of people that come from that background and have successful careers. We don't do nearly enough in highlighting, showcasing, and celebrating successful Latina developers, right? So that's one big step that we definitely want to start doing more and more. uh, Look at the work Latinx in gaming does, right? It's exactly the kind of thing that could be a source of a lot of good material and educational material for parents. So we're still figuring something out along those lines, but it's just, I think, such an insightful observation that had everything to do with Carlos's question that I felt like I should mention. So yeah, very fertile ground for us to still explore. And I'm preaching to the choir here. I'm talking, you know, at a Latinx in gaming event where a lot of what the great job, the great work that they do with the community is towards answering these kinds of questions. So I can probably learn way more than I can teach on this subject at this point from you guys. But thanks for your question. Hopefully that was list a little tidbit of insight uh, that I could offer. So now is when I check with my backstage staff, Zoram, folks. Do we have other questions we want to answer? How's it going?
Yo, yo, yo. Yes, we do have a handful of questions here. Starting off
All
with
right.
Pedro underscore Rideki. All right. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
it's better to be excellent in one style of art or good at one, two, three, two and a half, etc.?
Huh. That is a very good question, and one that applies not only to art, but if I were to rephrase it more in a broader way, would be: is it better to be a generalist or a specialist? And of course, there isn't the right answer, but in my experience, at least, being a specialist will open more doors because, again, and it has everything to do with everything we talked about here. Being a specialist leaves less room for uncertainty on behalf of the interviewer. So if they're looking for a artificial intelligence programmer with machine learning experience, and that's what you decided to specialize in, that is a much easier match to make. So specialization will open, uh, let's say, specialization will make it more likely that you get through the door, while being a generalist will open more doors. That's how I would phrase it, right? So really, it is up to each individual, and I believe in dedicating the time to what makes you the happiest doing, in that opportunities will come as a consequence of that. Because if you are happy doing it, if you have passion doing it, you will, by the nature of us all being intelligent individuals, we will find a way. We will figure out our niche, our, what it is that we bring of value. So whether I have 10 things that I really love to do, and I'll try to, if I have to build a feature on my own, and I have to do a little bit of art, and I have to design it, and I have to understand, programming, uh, I'll go do that. And maybe right beside me there will be somebody whose sole purpose in life is to be a programmer, and both are right as long as they're doing what they love. And I think we are fortunate to be in an industry where there's room for all of those profiles. So really, there's no right answer. Maybe you feel like you aren't specialized enough, so that you're opening lots of doors, but you're not getting through many. And that's what you identify as the gap. By all means, go, right? By all means, do that. Or, oh, I do love 10 different styles of making art for games, but I found that pixel art is really hot. So let me specialize on that as the means to get in to the industry, start building that experience, and then generalizing after, and then finding opportunities to do something other than pixel art that I also love, right? So that might be the answer for each of these cases. So it's very good that you're even asking the question, because that means you're self conscious about where you're spending your time, how you're complementing your resume and your skill sets. And that's a great starting point. But what I would say is, yeah, think about it that way. And the number of doors you're opening, how likely you are of going through one of them, and then yeah, build your plan around that.
All right. So next question is from our 2 month subscriber, Boyce Games. Shout out to Boyce Games. A lot
Hmm.
of a lot of my experience is in grad school projects instead of on the job experience. What is the best approach to sell that portfolio compared to a candidate with one or more AAA titles under the belt?
Right. And again, I think we've spoken about a lot of the tools you can use. Um, a project being a grad school project doesn't really undermine its value, as long as I said, you were ready to tell the world what you did and what you learned from doing it. Right. Um, okay. That game, or that part of a game that you built at school, doesn't even have a name. It won't be recognized. But other than very few examples, no one else has that many recognizable games under their belt anyway, especially if you're breaking into the industry. So chances are whoever's on the other side doesn't really know what the project is about, whether it is a commercial project or not. um, you know Chances are, you'll have to let them know what it was about and what you did with it. So I think that what you described as your own personal situation doesn't really, set you back that much, as long as you're following some of the tips that we shared today, as long as you're thinking about your portfolio as your ammo. But what's really important is what you make of it, that will build that confidence on the other side of the table, on the interviewer. So I think, yeah, if you go back to what we discussed today, you find plenty of you know uh, of avenues to answer your question.
Nice, nice, nice. Next question is from Hearty Messia. All right. And it says, does school still matter if you have a strong portfolio? I think I have a strong portfolio. And I wonder if that eclipses the significance of your education on a resume, since I also worked really hard in school and hope it still means something. Sad face emoji.
Yeah, again, I think it never hurts to have both, to have all the ammo you can muster. But again, I'll be honest, like, at least from my experience, the as an interviewer, you don't really care that, oh, that individual has to have a degree or has to have, like, there's no has to haves, or at least not that often. Maybe there's something very specialized. Oh, I need, that there's a role where you have to have a certain certification to do the role, to perform the role. Then of course that's a absolutely, obligatory requirement. But other than that, if we see an impressive resume, there's there's nothing that could be lacking there that would make us not at least go talk to that person if we're interested. So I'm always very conscious of self sabotaging, of putting obstacles in front of ourselves that aren't really there, you know. And that's why I think that's the underlying message when I said, "Hey, apply. Hey, go for it. Hey, don't miss the shot because you haven't taken it." I think the underlying message is really, don't let any self sabotaging arguments prevent you from going after what you want. And that applies here, I think. As I said, we see an impressive resume. We want to learn more about that candidate. There's nothing that could be lacking in there. There's no bullet point that might not be fulfilled that would prevent us from just doing that and seeing what they have to offer, what they have to say.
All right. Thank you for that. Next question is from Blanco Hugo.
Hmm.
What kind of questions do you like to hear when you're on the other side as an interviewer?
Oh, so yeah, I guess we never mentioned how, you know the interview process most often is a one-way street, but not always, and it doesn't have to be. Uh, and sometimes interviewers will do that. They will ask the candidate to ask questions of them. And what I'm looking for when I do that is to try to measure how self-conscious the candidate is, how the candidate thinks about what this next step in the career means to them. So when I ask, hey, what questions you have for me, what I expect is questions such as, okay, if I do get hired, how do I then grow my career? What that is telling me is, oh, this candidate is ambitious and is someone that will look to do everything they need to do to grow when within the company. So that's a very good question to ask. When I get asked, how do I grow my career once I'm in there? That tells me, hey, this is someone that, they won't just be happy with getting the job. They will be hungry to learn and grow. And honestly, that's it, it it's not that common that you can detect that through an interview. Um, Surely I would expect questions about the specific day to day role. That's someone who's thinking through, right? They they're not just interested in getting that title. Oh, I'm gonna get hired as a associate game designer. No, they're actually worried about doing the job and doing the job well, to the point where they're asking me, "Hey, how what it is that I'm going to be doing in my first day? What does a typical day look like?" So they want to prepare for when that day comes, and that shows, that extra layer of commitment, of interest. So that's the question I would expect. Um, and then, yeah, anything related to the product itself. So any questions they might have about, even if I can't answer them, but any questions they might have about, hey, there's this part of your game that I really like. Are you changing it? Are you, or the other way around? Hey, can you tell me how you guys built this? What, how did you come up with this idea? Uh, that again tells me that there's someone who is passionate about what we do, what the company does, um, and it is again a good sign. I don't know. I'm just making these up as we go, trying to remember things that I either liked from what people asked me, or that I expected them to ask. So those are some of the ones that I could come up with. I hope that answers the question, Hugo.
And our final question says from Voice Games once again: is
Hmm.
it better to list every project I've helped with on my portfolio, or is it better that you keep it more limited in focus? If limited,
Great, great, great question. Again, I am almost an advocate for portfolio is only the ammo, but the argument is the gun. So something adding something to the portfolio just because you worked on it, but if it's going to add more noise, then it will provide you an opportunity to talk about your strengths and your skill set. I don't think you have to do that. I don't think the portfolio has to be a laundry list of the things you did. Again, chances are people on the other side won't really know those projects by name. So they're just entries on a spreadsheet, right? Um, but if you, instead of doing that, spend the time and spend the space with highlighting the key learnings, the key aspects from your portfolio that qualify you for the role, I think that is a much better use of everyone's time, of the opportunity you have with your resume to call someone's attention. So that's what I would do. I would 100% focus on the entries that are going to give me the best bang for the buck. And they could vary depending on the job listing that I'm applying for, the company that I'm applying for. So there's no, I think that's a good problem to have. Oh, I have so much in my portfolio that I don't know what to include. Great problem to have, right? And think long and hard, do that homework, try to anticipate the questions, try to anticipate, how this is going to sound to the interviewer of that particular company, project, etc. And if you're doing that, I think you're making the best out of your portfolio makeup, in my opinion. That's it. All right. Cool. Again, thank you very much for the opportunity, Linux and Gaming Conexion. Please, everyone, stay tuned for a lot more great content and opportunities to connect throughout the month of June with Conexion. Zoram, you're you're my guy, man. Thank you so much for all your help. I appreciate the support very much. Thank you, everyone who was with us, and I'll see you next time. Well, always a pleasure talking to you guys about all of this. Hopefully, you're taking away some good stuff from here. Happy to connect, as you can see. Get in touch on the screen there. But I guess we're wrapping it up for today. Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.